Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. This deck is illegal in 9 countries. It's made of bits of real cardboard. They've done studies, you know. 50% of the time it works, every time. So, what is this deck and why exactly is that the case? Well, let's jump into it to find out. So what commander could be at the helm of such a deck? Well, of course it is Maelstrom Wanderer. Maelstrom Wanderer is a 7/5 elemental that costs 5 blue, red, green, and it says creatures you control have haste. But most importantly, it says Cascade, Cascade, which basically means that with each instance of Cascade, when you cast this spell, you exile cards to the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast it without paying its mana cost, put the exile cards on the bottom in a random order, then do it again. So essentially, you get to cast 2 things off the top of your library that are going to cost less than this. And one of those cards is, well, let's just say a personal favorite of many jank brewers out there. And a reason that this deck only works 50% of the time. Because even though there are only 2 non-land cards in it outside of Maelstrom Wanderer, well, depending on the order of those cards, this can either work very well or not at all. So the first card that I want to highlight is the entire crux of the deck, the idea behind this deck, and of course it is the Golden Pig of the deck. Being the Golden Pig of the deck means that it's the number 1 card out of our 99, and the Golden Pig for this deck is Treasure Hunt. Treasure Hunt might be a common, but there is nothing common about it. It's a sorcery that costs 1 and a blue, and it says reveal cards in the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. Then put all cards revealed this way into your hand. So in a lot of scenarios, this card can be a high-risk, high-reward play. It's a high-risk card because if the top card of your library just right away is a non-land card, well, then you get nothing into your hand. However, in another scenario, if you keep hitting land after land after land off the top of your library, for 2 mana, you're getting a lot of cards into your hand. And again, like I mentioned for this deck in particular, well, we only have 2 non-land cards in it. So essentially the goal for this card in our deck is to get every single land from our deck into our hand. In other words, the ultimate treasure hunt. And one thing I want to clarify really quick about the way that Cascade works. It does say that you are exiling cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less, and then you can cast out paying its mana cost, then you put the exiled cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So those are the steps of the process, but the actual card that you are cascading into and casting won't resolve until the exiled cards are put back onto the bottom of your library in a random order. So you would not be missing out on any of those lands that you exiled off the top of your library with that cascade trigger. They would be put on the bottom of your library before Treasure Hunt resolved. Just wanted to clarify that before continuing. But actually, now let's talk about that other non-land card in this deck, how it works with Treasure Hunt, and what order we actually want these cards in. And the other non-land card in this deck is Seismic Assault. It's an enchantment for red, 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 and it says discard a land card. Seismic Assault deals 2 damage to any target. So I think you can see where this is going. Essentially with Treasure Hunt, if we get every single one of our lands into our hand, well, that's going to be a ton of damage with Seismic Assault to our opponents. Again, unlikely that this is the case, and usually life totals will be lower, but assuming that everyone's life total is at their starting life total with 40 apiece, that is going to be 120 total damage we need to dish out, which typically would be an incredibly ridiculous or even impossible goal for Seismic Assault, but again, when you've got every single land that you could possibly have in your hand, you can dish out quite a bit of damage. Assuming 120 total damage, that would be 60 lands in total that we need to discard, 20 per person, which is obviously very doable when you've got 97 lands in your deck, and by the time you actually cast your commander, it's probably going to be around 80 plus or so. Regardless, the combination of these cards is quite potent, but again, like I mentioned earlier, the ordering does matter, and hence the name, 50% of the time it works every time. Again, with our commander, just by casting it, we get 2 cascade triggers, and the first card that we want to hit with it is going to be Seismic Assault, because then we can cast it, get that into play, and then cascade again into Treasure Hunt, then cast it, and we've got every single land in our deck into our hand. And of course, then if our opponents have reasonable life totals, we'll be able to take everyone out. That being said, if the order of these 2 cards is flipped, well, things might not work out. Because if we happen to cascade into Treasure Hunt first, we are going to hit Seismic Assault at some point. Now, technically, if Seismic Assault is in our last, 20 cards or so, we might still have enough lands off of Treasure Hunt to still win once we cascade into Seismic Assault. So, actually, okay, math-wise, maybe it is actually more like 60% of the time it works every time, which is kind of ironic. But yeah, there's definitely a chance where you cast Treasure Hunt, and then you reveal a couple of cards, get some lands, and then you reveal Seismic Assault, and all of a sudden you've stopped and only gotten a few lands in your hand with Treasure Hunt, and, you're not gonna win with that. Now, obviously, there is some sort of a middle ground where if you cast Treasure Hunt first, you might hit, 30 or 40 lands and you can take out 1 or 2 players, so you can kind of hold the entire table hostage and see if you can actually win from there. But yeah, obviously, the scenario that you're hoping for is that you hit these in the order that you want them, with Seismic Assault first and then Treasure Hunt. Is this janky and off the wall? Absolutely. And actually, at the end of this episode, I'm going to reveal a couple of other ideas that are also janky and off the wall that you could use instead of this one. But first, let's continue with this concept. Now, being able to cast Maelstrom Wanderer quickly and efficiently without any other non-land cards in this deck is a challenge, but we are up for it. Lands that can give us multiple mana are huge for this kind of a deck, like Hickory Woodlot, Saprazan Scary, and Sandstone Needle. Each of them are going to come into play tapped with 2 depletion counters on them, and then you can remove a depletion counter from them to add 2 mana of 1 color. Then if there are no depletion counters on them, you sacrifice them, but yeah, again, we're not going to be casting spell after spell after spell in this deck. We really just want to cast Maelstrom Wanderer, so we're pretty much only going to use these once, maybe twice if we want to utilize another land that has an activated ability, but we'll get to those here in a bit. Regardless, they do the job, and so do Rushwood Grove, Saprazan Cove, and Marcadian Bazaar. Each of these come into play tapped, and we can tap to put a storage counter on them, and we can tap to remove any number of storage counters from them to add 1 mana to our mana pool for each storage counter on them removed this way. Rushwood Grove is going to be green, Cove is going to be blue, and the Bazaar is going to be red. So these can actually help us out in a big way. If we get them down early, we can add counter after counter after counter to them, and then just start pumping out a ton of mana with them to get our commander out quickly. With the right lands in the right setup, we can actually cast our commander by turn 4, which is pretty absurd. Next up, we've got Hollow Trees and Sand Silos, which are also storage lands, but work in a different way. Each are going to come into play tapped, and you can choose not to untap them. When you do, you get a storage counter on them. Then you can tap to remove X storage counters from them to add an amount of green or blue, depending on which of the lands it is, to your mana pool. So yeah, just keep them tapped for a while and build up those storage counters. Regardless, speaking of storage lands, we also have Fungal Reaches and Mage Ring Network, which work in similar ways. Each can tap for a colorless, and we can pay 1 and tap them to put a storage counter on them. With Fungal Reaches, we can pay 1 to remove X storage counters from it to add X mana to any combination of red and or green, and Mage Ring Network can just tap to remove the counters from it to add colorless for each storage counter moved this way. Obviously, the earlier we get these down and the more that we can invest into them, the better they're gonna be. But of course, we also have some lands that require no investment, like Havenwood Battleground, Spellunite Temple, and Dwarven Ruins. Each of these are going to come into play tapped, tap for 1 mana, and then we can tap and sacrifice them to add 2 mana to our mana pool. The Battleground adding green, the Temple adding blue, and the Ruins adding red. Again, the goal of this deck is literally to just put all of our resources into casting our commander once. So losing some lands to get our commander out quicker is of course a sacrifice that we are willing to make. Speaking of which, and actually I should have mentioned this earlier, every single card in this deck outside of the commander is less than $1. And yes, I am including Crystal Veins gold bordered version because it is less than $1, so there. And of course, this is a great land for this deck. It can tap to add a color, so you can tap to sacrifice it to add 2 colors to your mana pool. So unlike the other lands, this one doesn't even come into play tapped, so yeah, it can help you out right away. Speaking of which, there's Temple of False God, which can tap for colorless as well, but you can activate only if you control 5 or more lands. Again, with a deck that has 97 lands in it, you are guaranteed to hit every single one of your land drops. So yeah, we're gonna have no problem getting to 5 lands. And then Thespian Sage can tap for a colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap and becomes a copy of target land, except it has this ability. So obviously this land can be incredibly impactful if we already have another land in play that can tap for multiple mana. Moving on though, some other colorless lands that can help us out if we get all 3 of them are Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower. Each only tap for a single colorless, but once we have all 3 in play, they're going to tap for 7 mana in total, with the Mine and the Power Plant each tapping for 2, and the Tower tapping for 3. Now, is it all that likely that we're going to get all 3 of these? No, but can it happen? Most definitely. And again, with the amount of lands that we have in this deck and the amount of mana fixing that we do have, we are okay with just running some colorless lands in it. Now, some lands that technically don't tap for more than 1 mana, but do help ramp us to actually get us more mana are Mirrored Landscape and Blighted Woodland. Mirrored Landscape enters the battlefield tapped, it taps for a colorless, and by paying 2 we can sack it to go get 2 basic lands that share a land type and put them on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. And then Blighted Woodland comes into play untapped, can tap for a colorless, and by paying 3 and a green we tap and sacrifice it to get 2 basic lands into play tapped. So yeah, just some fantastic ways to try to get our commander out quicker. Now, we also are going to be utilizing some Scry lands in this deck, like Temple of Mystery, Temple of Epiphany, Temple of Abandon, Quandrix Campus, and Prismari Campus. Scrying can definitely help us out in the right scenario. Again, if we've got a land on the top of our library that we don't want, we just put it on the bottom, or more importantly, if we see one of our non-land cards on the top, we put it on the bottom so our commander can hit it later. Regardless, the temples are going to scry when they enter the battlefield, and the campuses can scry when we pay 4 and tap them. Some more lands that can help us out in a different way are cards like Colony Garden, Carekeep, Lumbering Falls, Wandering Fumarole, Raging Ravine, Treetop Village, and Fairy Conclave. These can actually be ways to chip in some damage or to protect ourselves, because the first 2 are actually going to make us some tokens, and then the last lands can actually become creatures. Even just turning one of our lands into a creature to block an opponent's attacker can be enough to deter them from actually attacking. And again, if we want to chip in damage earlier to get some life totals down, we can. But we can also protect ourselves with lands like Mystifying Maze and Labyrinth of Scophos. Each of these are going to tap for a colorless, and Mystifying Maze has pay 4 and tap, exile target attacking creature and opponent controls at the beginning of the next end step, return to the battlefield tapped on its owner's control. And then Labyrinth of Scophos is somewhat similar. It has pay 4, tap, remove target attacking or blocking creature from combat. Again, obviously, we can activate these to save ourselves if an opponent is actually attacking, or again, they can just be a great deterrent if our opponents don't want to waste an attack on us. But quickly though, now let's move through some other lands in this deck that can either tap for all of our colors or can get us whatever color that we need, with Uncharted Haven, Aether Hub, Crumbling Vestige, Shimmer Drift Vale, Frontier Bivouac, Thriving Grove, Thriving Bluff, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Unclaimed Territory, and Path of Ancestry. And of course, we've got other lands that can tap for 1 of 2 colors with Mog Hollows, Pinecrest Ridge, Mossfire Valley, Is It Boilerworks, Simic Grove Chamber, Gruul Turf, Cinder Glade, Shivan Reef, Yalmaya Coast, and Game Trail. And finally, we've got some lands that can get us one of our basics with Ash Barrens, Evolving Wilds, and Terramorphic Expanse. And now I'm out of breath. But I still have enough breath to say that the rest of the lands in this deck are a combination of forests, mountains, and islands. You know, basics. Regardless, I did say that we will talk about some other off-the-wall combinations and some other cards to consider, and we will, but first let's talk about the price for this deck. So, like I mentioned before, every single card in this deck is less than $1 outside of a commander, so the estimated cost of this deck is just $35.69, even though Maelstrom Wanderer is like a $7 or $8 commander. And actually, that price is even more budget-friendly if you've already got the basic lands for this deck, because those lands are being counted at 10 cents a piece. So if you've already got those, that's like $4 worth of savings from that estimated cost. And speaking of potential savings, you might be able to save even more if you buy this deck on TCG Player and utilize heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include shipping, and that might vary depending upon where you live. Regardless, if your commander playgroup is not okay with a deck like this or combo decks in general, don't play a combo deck like this one. And if you're not sure with your playgroup, or if you're at an LGS, just make sure you ask before the game. Again, Commander is a social format, so just talk. Personally, I'm not going to be playing this deck with my playgroup, but I just like thought experiments like this and try to challenge myself to build some off-the-wall decks for fun. That being said, now that we've talked about the price for this deck and this combination, let's talk about some other combinations that are quite interesting. And this combination is both interesting and brutal, and again, it works 50% of the time. Because with this combination, we literally have the exact same deck, except we are switching out Seismic Assault and Treasure Hunt for Jokulhaups and Ward of Bones. Jokulhaups is actually one of the saltiest cards in Commander, so again, ask your playgroup ahead of time. It's a sorcery for 4 red, and it says destroy all artifacts, creatures, and lands they can't be regenerated. So this is mass land destruction, plus mass artifact, and mass creature destruction. So yeah, there's a reason this shows up on the salt score. Regardless, the other card in this combination is Ward of Bones. It's an artifact for 6 that says each opponent controls more creatures than you can't play creature cards. The same is true for artifacts, enchantments, and lands. So with this combination, again, all we have to do is cast Maelstrom Wanderer, and it's going to cascade twice. We cascade into each of these, and here's what we want to happen. We want to cascade into Jokulhaups first, so we destroy all artifacts, creatures, and lands. So everyone is set back down to essentially nothing except for enchantments and maybe planeswalkers. So again, because all artifacts were destroyed, like mana rocks, and all lands were destroyed, like, well, lands, no one has any resources to actually cast anything. And even if they try to build back up their resources, again, we cascade into Ward of Bones, and well, this just doesn't allow them to do so. Because from then on out, we're just not going to play any lands, and then our opponents, well, have a max number of lands of 1. So this pretty much shuts players down in basically any scenario. And then obviously from there, we can win with Maelstrom Wanderer just swinging out. Now again, obviously the phrase 50% of the time it works every time also applies to this, because if we cascade into Ward of Bones first, well, it's going to be in play for Jokulhaups to destroy. I mean, typically we are still going to win because, again, each of these are resolving before Maelstrom Wanderer actually resolves. So it's going to destroy the board, and then Maelstrom Wanderer comes into play, and it's the only creature in play, and we can just swing out and probably win from there. But still, obviously our preferred order of these is Jokulhaups first, then Ward of Bones. And actually, though I did say that we were going to be switching out just the 2 cards, we actually could add more into this deck because, again, unlike Treasure Hunt, we don't really care if we, have 100% all lands in this deck outside of these cards. So we can utilize a card like Johnsy Oracle of Arcavios, or should I say on the backside, Journey to the Oracle. Again, Johnsy has a converted mana cost of 8, so we're not going to be able to cascade into it with Maelstrom Wanderer, which is crucial because, again, we want to make sure we cascade into those other 2 cards. But on the backside, we've got Journey to the Oracle, which is a sorcery for 2 green, and it says you may put any number of land cards from your hand on the battlefield. Then if you control 8 or more lands, you may discard a card. If you do, return Journey to the Oracle to its owner's hand. This can be a massive land dump that can actually make it possible for us to get our commander out on turn 3. And again, this is all made possible because on the front side of the card, we've got an 8 mana spell. So keep that in mind with this type of a deck. You need to ensure that you can't cascade into other cards that you don't want to hit. So we can also take advantage of this with cards like Spring to Mine and Treacherous Terrain. Spring to Mine is an Aftermath card, so it's got 2 halves, and actually both halves are counted in that total converted mana cost when we're hitting it with Cascades, so we don't hit it. But again, if it is in our hand, we can cast that Spring portion to help ramp us by getting a basic land into play tapped, then shuffling our library. And then Treacherous Terrain is a sorcery for 6 red, green, and we can actually cast it to dish out some damage if we really want to. It's going to deal damage to each opponent equal to the number of lands that player controls. Or, more likely, we're going to basic land cycle it to get us the land that we want. Still, having the option to ping our opponents if we really need to can help us out in some scenarios. Other cards that we can utilize thanks to their high converted mana cost and flexibility are cards like Rough and Tumble, Walker of the Grove, and Primeval Protector. Rough and Tumble has a total converted mana cost of 8, so again, check mark there, but Rough we can cast for 2 to deal 2 damage to each creature without flying. And then Tumble we can cast for 6 mana in total, and it's going to deal 6 damage each creature with flying. Walker of the Grove is a 7/7 elemental for 6 green, which, again, that's the exact same converted mana cost as our commander, so we're not going to cast it in that way, but we can evoke it for 4 in a green. And then when it leaves the battlefield, we get a 4/4 elemental creature token, and again, having an extra blocker or an extra way to get damage through is never going to be a bad thing. And speaking of a great blocker, well, Primeval Protector is a 10/10 avatar for 10 in a green, but we're never going to pay that much. It's going to cost 1 less to cast for each creature your opponents control, and again, in a game of Commander, chances are this can cost, well, as low as 1 mana. On top of that, when it enters the battlefield, we get a +1 counter on each other creature we control, so if we happen to have another creature in play, well, it can help them out too. Regardless, one final combination that I do want to show you that does work 100% of the time is the combination of Mana Severance and Nexus of Fate. Oh, okay, 100% of the time with a tiny note next to it, and we'll talk about that tiny note here in a second. Mana Severance is a very old card, so I'm going to read its Oracle text. It's a sorcery for 1 and a blue, and it says, search your library for any number of land cards, exile them, then shuffle. And of course, Nexus of Fate, the bane of some formats like, Standard, Pioneer, and Historic. I believe it's banned in those. Regardless, Nexus of Fate. It's an instant for 5 blue, and it says take an extra turn after this one. If it be put in a graveyard from anywhere, reveal Nexus of Fate and shuffle into its owner's library instead. So unlike the other combinations, it does not matter which order you hit these with the cascade triggers. If you hit Mana Severance first, you take out every single land in your library, and yeah, now you've got no lands there. Then you cast Nexus of Fate to take an extra turn after this one, and since Nexus of Fate is going to be put in your graveyard when you cast it and it resolves, you reveal it, shuffle in your library, and it's actually the only card in your library. And again, if the opposite happens and you hit Nexus of Fate first, you cast it, it shovels in your library, then you cast Mana Severance, and then you get rid of all of your lands. So either way, Nexus of Fate is going to be the only card in your library. So then again, obviously, on your extra turn then, you draw the only card in your library, which is Nexus of Fate, you cast it, and then you get an extra turn, and then you shuffle it back in your library, and it's the only card in your library again. So essentially, infinite extra turns. Now, this is not a guaranteed victory, and again, the reason that I said a little note on this, because obviously just getting infinite extra turns doesn't just win you the game. However, if you've got ways to get damage through, like, your commander being in play and it can actually get through, you win. Again, you should have some extra lands in your hand, so if your commander is dealt with, you can pay commander tax maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 3 more times. But yeah, if you don't have enough ways to get through, enough damage to get through, then the game is a draw. Or okay, maybe rules lawyers out there correct me. I believe you could just keep casting it infinitely and taking extra turns and then, not losing, but I could be wrong on that. Maybe you have to, make a decision other than that. Regardless, yeah, this combination and the other combinations are not for all playgroups like I mentioned before, so please, please, please keep that in mind. But again, at the end of the day, whether the combination works 50%, 60%, or 100% of the time, I just like thinking up and designing these off-the-wall type of decks. Especially when they can be inspired from a fantastic quote from a fantastic movie. And here's another one. Great Odin's Raven! And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.